Okay, it's August the 20th, and I'm with Joel Porter, and we're going to talk about what art is and where time-based media fits into that. So, Joel, who was my tutor last year, by the way, I should say, what is art? What is art? What is the difference between something which is art and something that isn't art?
I think that's to do with the intentions of the artist. I think you have I wouldn't say anything could be art, but I think it's about the artist's intentions of what they want to say. They want to, do they want to shock somebody? Do they want to provoke?
Mm-hmm.
By putting something out there that people don't think is art, could be quite controversial, and it has been controversial. You look at Duchamp's sort of work over the last, and other artists over the last sort of years, that a bottle rack becomes a piece of art if you say it's art.
Mm-hmm.
And then people say, no, that's not art, and it creates a discussion, it creates an argument, it creates a provocation. I think that's, and then the more recent, Damien Hirst is another classic example of the provocativist in terms of provoking sort of other artists as well, to react to it. And it sort of changes. There's always those kind of moments, those epoch moments in time where something happens that changes the landscape of something. Bauhaus is another example of people sort of saying, well, that's not art, and even down to furniture and the way you see the world. I think it's about the way you perceive the environment and the way you see the world as well.
I like that. I like that.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's difficult because my mother would say, that's not art. And I was playing her Penguin Cafe the other day, and she said, that's not music. It was the piece with the tape with the answer phone loop,
mm-hmm.
and it's sort of, and then the musicians come in, and she said, "Oh, that's not music. I wouldn't see that as music." And it's an interesting kind of, and maybe that's because maybe maybe more conservative views come into that.
I feel like the name fine art leads a lot of people to think that it's only painting or drawing.
Yes.
They seem quite shocked when you suggest that it's anything beyond that.
I think true, but I think what happens is that it gets prefaced with fine art photography or
mm-hmm.
fine art sculpture or fine art something else.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sit just under the banner of fine art because people have a very strict view. It's like when you study fine art, it's already prescribed, isn't it? It's almost the sort of intention is that you're going to go and do painting or sculpture or something. But then fine art. I studied photography at a time when photography was the landscape was being shaken up by people who were using sort of colour film, which was, at the time was sort of seen as something amateurs did, and black and white photography was the, if you were an artist, you could do black and white photography.
Really?
Yeah, and people like Martin Parr. Martin Parr used to run tutorials at Farnham, at UCA, what was West Surrey College of Art and Design. He would come in for the day and run tutorials. Keith Arnott, another example, who came from a fine art background and taught photography, but he came to photography as a fine artist and looked at through the lens of fine art. And as a situationist, so looking at very much from the 1960s kind of reaction to the world around them as well. So he did the piece Self-Burial. I don't know whether you've seen it. It was in the Tate Britain, and it's a large piece, and it was a video piece that was shown after the news.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no explanation. It was after the German news. They just showed one image of a man standing in a field looking at the camera, and every night that he got lower and lower into the ground until he basically disappeared, and it was just called Self-Burial, and there's no explanation at all, and even to this day I used to have tutorials with Keith, and he'd say, I enjoy playing with kind of ideas, and I like to take people down the rabbit hole sort of thing, and I like to play with people's, so I never knew whether he was being serious or not at any particular time, but he was always an interesting character. But he did a piece which was just a shadow, and he then drew on the pavement a shadow of the artist as his former self. So, there's a lot of humour in his work. So, and again, people would probably say that's not art. But it's about I think a lot of it's about reaction. I think you're either trying to tell somebody something. I mean, there's always those artists that are trying to force an idea down at you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've quite often told students, is that you're either, are you trying to tell somebody something, educate them, or are you allowing them to experience something? So, there's sometimes artwork that you remember because it's quite reactive, and you don't necessarily know what the intention was, and you remember it really vividly. Or there's the artists that kind of annoy you because they're trying to be very PC, or they're trying to be environmentalists, or that kind of whole movement of
Mm-hmm.
trying to, this is my idea, this is how we should be thinking. And I think that doesn't always work, personally.
No, I'm really interested by the idea of provoking people to think about something, but without being prescriptive and telling people. I find it hard dealing with this thing that there is a right way to think and a not right way to think. It seems the opposite of curious.
Yes, yeah, that's a good way of putting it, actually, but that's the way that a lot of when I've been teaching, a lot of the students that come straight from school, where they're told how to think,
mm-hmm.
or how to do something. And it's not, art I don't think is about that. I think it's about exploring and expanding your own knowledge, but also enveloping something into a wider context of, I always think it's sort of, it's about exploring the world around you and using everything that makes you. So I also say to students that, that there's no right or wrong, which is always a difficult concept. I mean, obviously if you're failing all the time, but you've got to fail, in a way you've got to sort of fail to understand. We do this all the time. We fail, we learn to drive, we fail, and we pick up and we start again, and it's quite hard. That's why there are hard concepts in life and it's not. Sometimes things are not easy, and I think students give up because if it's not easy, they don't want to. They want to explore something anymore. It's like, well, I did that once. I took a photograph and I didn't like it, and I wasn't very good, and it doesn't look like the pictures on Instagram, so I've stopped doing it.
I think that's a really interesting place we've got. Last year, when I was in your class, one of the things I felt quite aware of was that a lot of people felt there wasn't enough structure, like they wanted to be told specific things to do, and even my good friend Charlie, when you're coming to halfway and we had to do little essays, would say, I don't have anything to show. And you go, what do you mean? What about this? You tried this, you tried this, you tried this. Yeah, but they didn't come out. And you're like, that's worth showing. Show that.
Equally valid.
Show that.
Yeah.
Show that and say, this is why it didn't come out. This is what I learned from it. Yeah. That's as valid, isn't it?
I was sort of make the analogy. My nephew is a scientist, works as a scientist. He's a sort of chemical engineer, and he works for pharmaceutical companies and developing stuff. And things don't always go to plan. And so you record all of those things, and that's what happens in science. You record everything, you document everything, you write it up, and it may be that what you're expecting doesn't happen. But what happens is that paper gets read, and part of the knowledge gets passed on, so people don't repeat that process.
Mm-hmm.
And they learn from that, and then it progresses the science. and that's in commercial terms, that's failure. But equally on commercial terms, it's like, well, we're not going to fund this project because we know it failed.
Right.
So we can move on. We can learn from that, and then we can say, okay, that didn't work, but what about this? And you can have successes down the line, but those successes are built on the back of all the failures.
Yeah.
Because you don't just start something and and then go, yes, it works, fine, off we go. It's basically, you've got to look at the history of a subject, and even down to sort of the commercial world of fashion. Is look at TK Maxx.
Mm-hmm.
TK Maxx is an obvious sign of failure in the industry.
Yes.
Because it's all full of stuff that nobody wanted, and to be crude about it, but it's kind of
It is, yes.
It's a warehouse full of stuff that nobody wanted to buy. Even though it's been tested at one end with consumers sort of saying, would you buy this trainer? Oh yes, we love that colour, and obviously it hits the market, and not every country likes it.
Mm-hmm.
So it ends up in the big warehouse.
Yeah.
So there's lots of analogies of kind of, I think, of going back to when you can sort of say, okay, well, how do you apply that to art? Can you apply that to art? Is there a success and failure? I mean, Van Gogh wasn't. I think he sold one painting in his lifetime, something like that.
Yeah.
Now it's worth billions of pounds.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What makes that suddenly become a commodity?
And what does?
Why is it? And does it? I mean, art, and we're starting to get to the sort of realms of commercial art, and
Yeah.
but that's a different story. But if you look at it, was that art at the time? It probably wasn't, because of the way he was painting, and it wasn't in fashion. So that wasn't. He was just a crazy painter,
Wrong
funded
time.
by his brother.
Yeah. You mentioned one person. Who else, when you were studying, was influential on you? Who did you feel helped move you along?
I was sort of taught by Keith Arnott when I did my undergraduate, but I did a master's later, and I studied media arts. So I went from photography, and I could have stayed doing photography and done a master's in photography, but by that point the internet had come along, digital technology was emerging and developing, and I was quite interested in things like Bluetooth and sort of data and broadcasting signals and things that we were carrying around with us that were broadcasting, and what could you do with that, and could you use photography to influence, to be part of that in a way of displaying imagery. I still wanted to be part of my work to be photography related, so it was digital at this point, and then using technology to sort of play with, and so whether you could sort of use Bluetooth to change images and things like that. So influences, I was taught by Andrea Zapp at Manchester Met, and she was quite influential in terms of her work was about using the internet and connecting things together. So connecting machines together, or connecting. So she built like a virtual hotel room where you could choose your own backdrop and the window display, and so it's like an online virtual space. At the early days of it, sort of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
People like Susan Collins as well, who was using cameras but in a very slow, and again coming back to your work around time and place. Susan Collins did a piece where I think every minute the camera would just take one pixel, so it would just build a pixel at a time.
I like that.
And it would be like 24 hours of and it would go from day to night, but it would just be and the pictures don't really make sense because half of it's blank because it's darkness, but these images were built a pixel at a time, and it's just a static camera looking out to a landscape, and it's just like one pixel, next pixel, and it's just built up over. It's a real time-based sort of image. So that was quite influential in terms of using technology not as it should be used. So using a sort of like a webcam or something like that, and then the way it was it's used, rather than capturing a live image, it was capturing a live image, but it was capturing it over a cycle of 24 hours rather than to build one image. So that's quite an interesting kind of idea of what we define by imagery, and what, how do we see? We see things very differently to where the machine does. So, and what do we? And again, back to what is art? Is that is that art, or is that just a clever way of using a webcam or a security camera?
Well,
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I think
it's the intent. Back to the intention. What you
I was going to say,
saying.
why did she want to do that?
I'd have to reread some of her work, but yeah, she did a piece of sort of like Ghost in the Machine, I think, as well. It was about filming using a camera in a stately home that was supposed to be haunted, and then just doing similar work with sort of imagery and as well recording things over time. So yeah, and just I suppose it's back. I think for me, it's back to intention. It's like what was the intention? Because anybody could say, well, I could set up a camera. And that's always the argument with art. Is that, well, I could just do that. It's like I could be. Look at Pollock's work. Sort of, I could just.
No, but you didn't.
Yeah.
What you didn't.
Yes, you didn't. But you after the event, people say, well, I could stick a shark in a tank, or a fish in a tank, or I could chop something up and stick it in formaldehyde. But you didn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it comes back. For me, the fundamentals it's the intention of the artist and they're pushing the boundaries. And again, all of that work comes out of the legacy of what came before.
I think with Pollock, it was like an eye-opening moment for me when I discovered that it was kind of a record of his movements, of the way that he'd. Yeah,
and you can't. To be honest, if you gave somebody a 60-foot canvas and the same colours in the paints, they wouldn't produce that.
No.
There's a technique to it, and there's a fluidity and movement, and it's all about. Yeah, as an artist, nobody else could have reproduced it the same way.
No, I mean, and when you know that and you look at it again, they're remarkable. There's something incredibly.
They are. When you look at them close up, and there's a sort of liveliness and movement to them. Yeah, but then then the argument about looking at history, Carl Andre and the bricks, I could have just done that, put a series of bricks in a row. Again, like you say, you didn't.
You didn't. Yeah.
So there's an intention, and again, whether the intention is it necessary to know the intent, the reason why?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose sometimes the piece, whatever it is, makes it clear what the intention is, and other times it doesn't. But there are definitely times when I've seen work, and the intention is on on a plaque by the side of it, or on a sign by the side of it, and I read it, and I'm like, well, I get what the intention is, but I still don't.
Yeah.
I'm still not seeing that there, which is, I guess, another thing. But I mean, that could be as much my feeling as the artist. I mean, if the artist thinks that's what it's doing, then who am I to say it's not?
But it's sort of memorable. I would probably sort of think about. For me, it's about thinking about the most memorable pieces of work that I've seen. When I think back to sort of artists that were in their infancy, when I and I didn't really know them. I went to the private view of what has become now sort of known as the early stages of sort of certain artworks like I've just lost it now. Just lost the plot. The shark in formaldehyde.
The young British artist.
Yeah, that show was in the biscuit factory. Disused biscuit factory. I went to the private view of that because friends of mine are artists, and they were at Goldsmiths, and they said, we always go along to these shows, and at the time it was the night of one of the World Cup or Euro football matches, the sort of the final, and England were in the sort of semi-final, the final, and nobody was looking at the artwork. I think the artists were in a kitchen, and I guess now looking back, it was all of those young artists were in a kitchen watching on a small portable TV a football match. But the pieces I remember is Damien Hirst's pieces. Out of all of those artists, it was 1,000 Years, which is the cow's head and the flies and the sugar cubes in a glass box, and there was a medicine cabinet full of glass bottles and jars, and the spot paintings. I think there was some spot paintings there as well. And that's the three things I remember. I didn't know the artist who was exhibiting them, and now they're quite clearly, evidently Damien Hirst. You don't have to, but at the time I didn't know that they were all connected. But they're the only three pieces I remember from that show.
And why do you remember them? Or why did you?
I don't know. The shocking one was, I suppose, was the cow's head, a full size, cow's head in a, just blood and then flies, thousands of flies, and this hole in the middle, and this absolutely disgusting scene of flies and maggots, but intriguing, absolutely intriguing. How this thing kind of totally enthralled you, because it was like nothing you've ever seen before in an art gallery. The glass bottles, I think it was just slightly out of kilter. It was like something slightly on edge of, why is this here? And the spot paintings, because it was almost like too simplistic. It was like, well, this isn't normal. It's almost like a childlike sort of painting. So I think probably all of those things coming together. I didn't know it was the same artist, but it's like these things are slightly off. It's like if you ever watched sort of a horror film, or if you watch something, there's something slightly left field, or slightly something on the fringes of something not quite right that's about to happen. And I think that's probably what it was. But I don't remember any of the other artists.
Wow.
Which was I found, looking back, I think it was quite a strange experience, because normally that doesn't happen. There was Roger Hyon did a piece in Deptford in an old sort of disused flat or small property, where years later it was part of Art Angel project, and he coated it all in this chemical with sort of crystals, and the crystals were growing, so the whole space was growing blue crystals, all the walls, all the ceilings, everything. That was quite memorable. I still remember that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
His work was quite interesting, because you walked in and it wasn't anything that you would, it's like a domestic setting of walking in the front door, and it was like everything's gone, and it's like almost like this alien space where it's just all the walls, all the surfaces were growing with these blue crystals.
Yeah, I could imagine that would be pretty memorable.
Yeah. So there's certain pieces in life where I've sort of thought, yeah, that's really weird. That's really weird. It's not just about the weirdness, I suppose, but I think things that are slightly off kilter that I find quite memorable and quite challenging. It's like, well, why have they done this? And some of it you can't explain.
Turning to time-based media.
Yeah.
Why is there a distinction between film and video and an installation? I mean, they're all things that either are a record of time or happen over the time. I was at Tate Britain yesterday, and there was a piece, I can't believe I've forgotten his name, who had taken one of the New York artists who makes the balloon animals. Anyway, he'd taken a piece of his, a head of his, and made a little film of it, just in a bare studio, so taking it out of context and done it in a bare studio. But then the twist was that he hadn't taken that and filmed it. It was a CGI reproduction of it. So it's a CGI reproduction, and then on the sign next to it, it had 16mm transferred to video. And you're like, why? Why does that matter? And that's not even really right, is it? If it's CGI, then it's CGI rendered, and then rendered over to film, and then the film transferred to video.
Yeah, but why is that?
Why are there these distinctions? Why does anyone
care?
Surely it's all just image sequences now, isn't it? I mean, it's a record of something. It's a bit like the black and white photography and the colour photography. I sort of get a gut feeling.
Yeah, but also a lot of artists, especially if you're talking about performance or you're talking about installation, it's the only way you can represent it unless you do a live show.
Mm-hmm.
So quite often, and that kind of is an interesting thing about. Yes, you could do a performance and you could say, well, that's the piece and it lasts for that duration. And that's but there's no record of it. But a lot of artists will want, it's like Andy Goldsworthy's photography. He's not a photographer, he's an artist that creates these site-specific art pieces. But, some of them are made of snow and ice and twigs, and he layers leaves in water, in streams. And it's sort of very site-specific, and it's like an installation. It's about nature. It's about our relationship with nature and how we. But in order to document it, it's now on going back a few years now. But it was sort of like the Athena poster, sort of kind of. But he's not a photographer. He's made an installation in the wild. And some of them more permanent. You can go and visit some of his pieces that are actually sheepfolds in the Lake District, where he's actually created a hole and almost taken it sort of slightly off-kilter. It's like a slice that's kind of been shoved 45 degrees so that all the stone is going diagonal. But they're probably the only pieces that are easily to sort of go and visit. Most of his work is kind of ephemeral. It disappears. He makes a big snowball, and with sticks and everything all embedded in it, and it's gone by sort of 2 days later.
Mm-hmm.
There's a beautiful piece of his, actually, talking of time-based, is where a really simple piece where he's filmed himself standing against a frosty shed in the middle of the countryside, and as the sun rises and casts a shadow, or it hits him and casts a shadow on the back of the wall of the shed, and he just stands there for about 5-10 minutes. And the video is just 5-10 minutes, and then he just walks away, and there's just this sort of shadow of him in frost.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
And I can't find the video. I wish I had it, but I've looked for it, searched for it, and I can't find it. But I've seen it once, but it's out there somewhere. But it's a beautiful sort of the simplicity of, and making you think maybe about how we think of our time, and because that's obviously a transient piece of time. It's gone, never to be returned. It does make you think, some of those pieces. But in order to show that, you've either got to have an audience, or you've got to video it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess people like Matthew Barney, some of those New York artists that created pieces and sort of very much installation, quite provocative in terms of their content. And who's the other artist who did the Bruce Nauman,
mm-hmm.
who did the clown piece, was sort of that. They're all video pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And again, does that change the way you see it? Because it's now on video. You can distribute it. You can go on YouTube now, which I guess the artists hadn't thought about when they made the work.
Mm-mm.
It would be shown in a gallery, because the distribution would be on probably a VHS tape, and probably quite controlled by the artist, and the distribution of that would have gone to the Museum of Modern Art. It would have gone to and it would have been shown at the Tate on the screen. But now somebody can just copy that and put it on YouTube, and now you're watching it on your phone.
That's interesting with those kind of pieces. If it was at MoMA in New York, would the artist also let a version of it be a tape written at the same time, or is this like one setup of it that has to move?
Or there's only one tape.
Yes,
Like a piece of like a Picasso where you're shifting it from.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, does being able to copy it diminish it in any way, or does it make it
More
better
accessible.
and more people can see it?
Yeah. But does it sit alongside the cat videos on YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
Because someone's got a playlist and they just kind of, it's like, oh, it's the next thing along.
Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of, it just gets picked up by an algorithm.
Yeah, it's strange.
And somebody's done a search for clowns because they're going to a fancy dress party and it pops up with Bruce Nauman, screaming into the camera dressed as a clown. But I think that starts to diminish it because it's the context and maybe where you show it and how you see it in the context in which you see it, and the distribution of these things is shifting our understanding of what these things are.
It is interesting that because one person I spoke to, when I said what is art, their answer was, well, it depends where you see it. If you see something in a gallery, then that clearly is art.
Yeah,
And
I'd still
that was,
argue with
and
that,
I was like, well, that's a fair starting
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
There's an intentionality to that, isn't
That's
there?
right. You go to a gallery to see artwork. Yeah.
Right, and when I spoke to them equally about time-based stuff, their feeling about that was that stuff that was art didn't necessarily have a beginning and an end, that because you go into a gallery and you walk into that area where it is and it's on a loop, it's not like you walk in and it starts for you. It is where it is and you watch it until you do and then you walk out.
Yeah.
And so they felt there was something slightly different about that than, say, watching a drama or a sitcom. But
you can watch is a cinema traditionally it would be called an art house.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, you'd go and see art at the cinema.
But then, as you say, when something pops up on YouTube,
Yeah.
I mean, is there a reason why YouTube can't be a sort of gallery?
It can be, yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I know people. There's an artist or photographer called Dr. Lop Lop, I think, or somebody like that. He used to sort of show cat. He had a collection of cat memes and cat videos, and he would just at the photographer's gallery, and he had that on loop, just with his cat videos, and this sort of obsession people have with sort of cat memes and all sorts of cat related, I suppose, artwork in a loosest sense. But does that become art once it goes into a gallery?
I suppose if there's some kind of commentary about it or some
I suppose it's
opinion or something, then why not?
And then people like Dick Jewell, he teaches at the Royal College, who collected discarded passport photographs and then published them in a book. And then whose work is he's got a book out of like 1,000. It's like 1,000 photographs, and it's each one connects to the previous one. So it's somebody jumping off a bridge into water, like kids do in the summer, and then the next one is somebody jumping off something else, but it's slightly related to the previous one, and then eventually there's somebody jumping out of a window onto a trampoline or something. So they're almost like these people are all jumping, and then it shifts, and the trampoline then changes into something else, and then something. So it's like he's scoured the internet for all these images, and they're all related in some way, but they kind of, and he's just like, it's almost like this sort of. And now you'd use AI to kind of go and find them all or create them, but he's got, it's just a book of about this thick of.
So it's sort of like connections. It starts here and
it starts and it carries on,
weaves
and then
its way all the way up.
Yeah, there's sort of subtle connections between each photograph that kind of weaves its way, and they move on to the next image and the next image, and they're all been trawled from sort of found images. He does a lot of work with found photography, found images, and there's a whole collection of people working with found imagery. There's if you search for found photography or found photos, there's a whole kind of group of people that create little little magazines and zines and things of found photographs. It sort of goes, but it's lightly punk almost in its sort of in its design. And then there's a whole section of there's dirty found photographs as well, where people have got found sort of almost slightly pornographic found photographs, and then they've collected them and published them as well. So there's a whole scene of people and artists that are doing work with found stuff. It's a bit like thrift store artwork as well. You know, there's a whole kind of thing about found artwork in charity shops. Slightly off topic, but yeah.
And what's that saying?
I suppose it goes back to the YouTube thing, isn't it? It's about the sort of the availability and the internet and the way that we're kind of processing imagery now. I think that photography has definitely lost it's shifted its momentum, because everyone takes photographs, and the latest cameras take the photographs better than some professionals, because it's all built-in algorithms, and it's not based on light in a way anymore. It's you can balance out an image. So you're somebody that's backlit like you are now. The camera will
figure out
the exposure for you, and then compensate for the fact there's a window behind you. So you don't have to, and I think that's why a lot of students get disenchanted with photography, because it doesn't. I can take a better picture with my phone. What does that say about the industry? You know, and being an artist, because it's not about, because there's different types of artists. I mean, you can be very technically, you know, an Ansel Adams of the modern world, of, you know,
Gursky.
Yeah, where you're a sort of, you construct these painstaking imagery that nobody else can do, because you've got a technical mind as well. You're kind of really you're as much a technician as a photographer, or is a photographer a technician? You know, that rather than an artist. And there's always that sort of thing. Or, you know, you're very good at taking photographs, therefore you don't have any creativity. And, you know, Gursky's a good example, and some of the Becker school of Dusseldorf school of, you know, sort of photography, where it's very that German precision almost of recording something. Back to that idea of recording something.
Well, I was going to say, so then is that a bad thing? If time-based stuff is really about recording something, almost about recording an installation or a happening or something,
but then
is it bad for it to be?
I don't think so. I think it's about back to the intention of what did you intend it to be. I mean, the classic example is I was taught by Keith, but Keith Arnott did an exhibition in the 70s, and it was during this. It was to do with a strike of gallery workers, gallery security staff, and I think he exhibited the pictures of the staff in the gallery, and then there was a gallery with a clock. So the gallery had its start when it started and when it ended, but there was nothing in the room. There was just the clock counting down to the end of the exhibition. And what then you realise is that the exhibition is the people that are attending the space. So the people become the exhibit almost. You know, the scene is the gallery space, and those are the people in it. And it just counted down. And he recreated it a few years ago, and then he was selling. You could buy a picture of the clock, and you could sort of say, "Oh, I want, you know, different this."
So you
time.
could own a second, for instance,
you
or
could
something.
own a second of that time of that exhibition, a photograph of that exhibition. Yeah. So it's about, again, back to intention. What, you know, most people say, "Well, what's crazy? It's just nothing in here, and it's just a picture of a clock." but it's about the time that you've spent in that space, I suppose, and what happened in that time that you occupied that space. So there's kind of interesting sort of considerations when you realise that. But you probably a lot of people came out pissed off because there's nothing there.
Yeah.
I dressed up, went to this exhibition, there's nothing there, and left. Or does it become very sort of quite bourgeois thing to do? Oh, I went to this great exhibition. It's a bit like the Emperor's Clothes, or the John Cale Silence.
Well, there is a fair amount of bourgeois stuff in art, isn't there? I mean, that's just inherent to, because they can afford and have the time to indulge themselves with that.
Was it 2.11 seconds or something? 2 minutes 11 seconds. Was it John Cale's piece of the piano piece where it's just a silence?
Yeah.
And it's about the people in the room. It's about the fact that you're all there in that space for that duration. And similar with Keith's work, you know, that you're in a space, but it's counting down to the end of the exhibition. Yeah, I'm not sure I have any answers on that one. But it's thought provoking.
Exactly.
It's poking you to say, wake up a bit, think about stuff, don't get complacent.
Yeah, a provocation.
And I quite like that sometimes. I mean, you know, because it's actually quite. There's also humour in a lot of the work. And I think sometimes humour seems to be missing from a lot of artwork as well. I don't mean it's laugh, it's funny, laugh, ha ha, but it kind of it doesn't take it so seriously. Itself so seriously.
Yesterday, I went to see the Tavares Strachan show at the Hayward. It was the second time I'd been to see it. I'd enjoyed it so much, and I felt that was full of big ideas that were as big as the work. In, as we say, he put together an encyclopedia about this thick of stuff that hasn't been recorded, achievements by people of colour and things that have gone unnoticed or forgotten, and papered the room with pages from it, and then the book sits there in the middle. And that's a fantastic idea, the idea of an encyclopedia of things that haven't been recorded, haven't been noticed, haven't been acknowledged as much.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the internet's full of it, or not full of it.
Yeah.
Because when you go to search for something you know exists, or did exist, there's no record of it.
Yeah.
And that's quite interesting in its own right. And I found that I got quite annoyed a few years ago because again, it was to do with artists in the sort of late 80s, early 90s that set up a shop in East London called the House of Beauty and Culture, and it was like a little tiny sort of house, and it was a collective of a number of fashion designers, shoemakers. John Moore was one of the shoemakers who made these amazing shoes, and a number of artists that exhibited their work in there. It was just, I went there once, and they'd hammered coins into the floor, so the floor was just completely scattered. There were scattered coins, but they were all across the floor as well. And then it was sort of dark little rooms and people exhibiting stuff. And at the time, it was people like the people that would buy their clothes and things were people like Boy George, or people in that sort of scene. And it didn't really last very long, but some of the work was quite interesting. So people making badges, they'd made badges by cutting bits out of a pound note, and just bits of the pound note on as badges. So these make a whole. And it was quite punk in its sort of its approach, and using kind of bits of leftover street furniture and remaking things as tables, and so it was quite There's one book that documents this, and it's made by the ICA. So, and I bought a copy of it, but nothing really exists online. There's very little information about any of it online.
It's interesting that, isn't it?
But it may be quite cross.
There are people or incidents or art or music or news or whatever that was pre-internet that is big enough for someone to have gone back and bothered to make. And then there's stuff that you might be aware of, like you say, but for some reason just didn't make it. And like none of the people who took part in that have bothered to put anything together or not bothered. That sounds like I'm judging them, and I don't mean it that way, but just that there's no records. Because nowadays, if something's not on the internet,
doesn't exist.
It didn't happen, did it? Really? No. I mean, which is a terrible thing to say, but
Well, John Moore, as an early age, committed suicide. So the shoes that he made are a legacy of him, his work, and there's some images of, and then they come up sometimes in, on eBay in Japan. So somebody's got a pair of his shoes in Japan that are selling them, and you just think, well, okay. But there's sort of little record of him as a designer or an artist and the other people, but somebody's compiled quite a lot of information into a book that the ICA was selling, and it's almost like that's the only proper record. It's almost like someone's thesis, almost, that they've kind of looked back and found all this information, posters, and it was quite anarchic, I think, the way that they all worked and pulled things together. But there's no record online. I mean, you can try, and I've tried doing searches, and if you type the House of Beauty and Culture,
sounds like the kind of thing a big fashion brand would try and reuse and co-opt.
I can't get internet access, but it's one of those things.
Nothing exists if you can't get internet.
That's true. But it's one of those things that I think, as an example, shows what else is missing.
Lots and lots. And
also things that used to be there that disappeared. So a funny one is Amstrad, the original Amstrad website from the...
Is that on the Wayback Machine at all?
I don't know whether it is. And the funny thing about it was, you got sort of Alan Sugar's kind of legacy of these kind of crappy machines, and either it was, but also I remember growing up with an Amstrad sort of tape recorder or something, and record player that had a vertical record player. It didn't work very well because obviously the record's that way, and the needle never used to engage properly. But it looked cool, it's a real 80s thing, but it was rubbish. But also the person that maintained the Amstrad website also then used to, at the back end of it also talked about himself and his hikes or whatever he did, or he'd go off walking and stuff. And this was this big corporate Amstrad website with John from the IT department, who used to post things about his walks at the weekend.
Off the same site?
Yeah, well, it was actually linked from his, you could go to and you could say about the website, and then you'd find information about him as a, and it's got, everything's become tidy and cool, very, very, you would never see that ever again on the website, because everyone's, paying huge amounts of money to have these kind of flash websites now. But nobody would ever do that, but because at the time it was only one person probably in the company who knew how to build a website, and he got the job, and
he got away with it. And people weren't paying that much attention.
No.
Then were they? Because most people didn't. They did it because they thought they ought to have one, but they didn't quite get why they were having a website.
Yeah. And so this guy used to have and there used to be obviously those old 80s sites where it was just random colours and text that blinked.
Oh my God! It was yes. It's of an era, isn't it? When you see
Yeah.
that, you immediately go, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
that's 95."
Yeah, yeah. but it kind of, those things are, you know, as soon as they realised what was happening, I'm sure it got ditched and sort of deleted and doesn't exist anymore. But I think websites are a classic thing, where things have disappeared, even just the sort of and there is a sort of an argument for archiving digital work, and how do you archive it? There's a whole academic conversation about archiving. There's a mailing list for sort of digital archivists and people. How do you keep a copy of the machine that it was running, the operating system that it was running, and then you realise that what happens if that machine packs up? Can you install an early version of Windows 3 point whatever onto a new machine, or so there's all of that. We will lose a certain amount of work because nobody's got a Laserdisc player or one of those big, those like the ones they've sent into space or something.
Last year, I bought a floppy drive and some floppies.
Yeah. I still have the floppy.
And I did it. You have the floppy camera,
Yeah.
and I was fascinated by that as a result of that, and the fact that it would store. It would vary, but for the most part, it would store 10 pictures on
Yeah.
one floppy,
Yeah.
which is 1.4 megs.
Yeah. So 100k each or something, aren't they? So 10.
Right,
Yeah.
because there's a little bit of room for
Yeah.
all the menus and things telling you where it is and how much, keeping a track of it and making it accessible. So 100k for an image.
Yeah, but that's when I started building. I had a job building websites. You were told to try and keep the images to maximum of about 30k, and they add up because you've got the banner heading of the company, and then you've got some images, and you've got images for your buttons, and there's that. Now you can do it in HTML5, but at the time, if you wanted a button that looked like it had been pressed, you had to do two different states of a button, an image of a button to say click, that you've clicked on it. So when you added up all the images,
there are a lot.
There's a lot of, and you're basing it on. I don't know whether Dreamweaver used to be able to tell you the download speed of how much time it would take to download a page with, say, 100k's worth of a page that's 100k, because you've got the file itself, the HTML file as well, and then you've got the images that are loaded in as well. So it might be 120k, and on a dial-up connection at 56.6 modem, or if you were lucky, you had one of those. Otherwise, it was a 24 point something modem, a speed through your phone line, because you're being charged for your phone bill.
Yeah.
So you wanted people to load it to load as quickly as possible. Otherwise, people lost interest.
Yeah, but 140k it probably took 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds. Because you never got 56k, did you?
No. I mean, you'd say, you tried to get it to load, and there used to be the 5k awards, where there was a competition to make a website under 5k, and it was all text based, but it was almost like this sort of ASCII character art, and sort of for buttons and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, the sort of 5k awards. Well, that was at the time of, I remember working in Dillon's bookshop, which used to be, it's now the one on Gower Street, the big bookshop on Gower Street in Bloomsbury, and we used to sell the internet yellow pages. So there was a yellow pages for the internet. You'd go, I'm looking for carpentry, or you're looking for sort of bookshops or something, and you'd go through bookshops, and you'd have all the websites in a big thick, like a yellow page. Well, it was yellow pages.
That's
the internet,
incredible.
before Google. And I remember being sent a kind of promotional little tin, Google tin, silver Google tin, Google on the top, and inside it just had a business card, and it was full of jelly beans, sort of like edible jelly beans. And I thought, what's Google? What's this Google thing? And it was just like, join our new, There was because at the time there was Alta Vista,
Excite,
Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves, yeah.
And you used to have to type, if you didn't know, there was no way of searching for anything really properly, but until Google came along. And then I was sent this little, I've still got it somewhere, like a little kind of bit beaten up now, but it's a little metal Google tin, promotional aluminium tin, with a kind of a little card saying join our, sign up, become one of our, our members or something.
Yeah, I think we forget just how much Google have done for the internet. I mean, I know it's a bit rubbish now and generally shitified, but that it did bring order to the internet. All of a sudden you could find stuff and it made it useful, whereas prior to that, a lot of the time going online just felt like going to the circus or something. You just go online and be like, wow, look, I found...
Yeah.
It was hard to actually find stuff you wanted. So it was more just a sort of like a tour around some strange land that...
And then Berners-Lee had said, he's opposed to the sort of walled garden of this sort of idea that the paywall behind a lot of these things, the services now, and that's what he sort of said, that wasn't my intention to create this thing. It was about sort of knowledge and sharing knowledge, not about monetizing. I mean, a lot of it has become monetized, in terms of you can't get access to this because you've got to pay for. So most of the newspapers now you've got to pay. But there's sort of other things that I remember I had a job working at the University of Kent in their computing department, and one weekend I took my grandmother in, and she died at 102. She was born in 1919, and I took her in and sat down in a machine room, probably twice the size of this room, with servers and everywhere, little tiny monitors and screens and things. And it was a weekend, so nobody was there. And I sat her down and I showed her the internet for the first time, and that was in 96, something like that. And she found it frightening, because first of all I showed her because NASA at the time had got all of their information, all of the astronauts, all the crew, their lives, their life history, where they went to school, their children, their wife, to me, all of their personal life was there, where they studied, what schools they went to, their training program, everything. And because it was an interesting to sort of show her all this information that you could be presented from across the world. And she just came across it, she said, that's really frightening, because she thought it was about everyone. She thought everybody had this sort of, this was out there on this screen, and it was about, her family, And I said to explain it was just about, these organisations that had agreed to put this information up. It wasn't about everyone, but but it is now, But she was very frightened about it, because she'd grown up in 1919, and it was sort of, she was 80s, 90s at the time. So
yeah, that's...
And to see this information just pop up on screen. Again, sort of, she didn't like FaceTime and things like that. It was like talking to someone that's dead. That's what she said to me, because it's sort of like they're not in front of you, and if you've grown up with not talking to somebody, you had the telephone, but this idea of seeing somebody on a screen that's not present.
I don't disagree with her there. I don't love FaceTime.
And that sense of disengagement.
Yeah,
and again, that's about space and time as well. It's about bridging those spaces. You've got asynchronous conversations where you can have a conversation over a period of time. Text allows you to do that. Emails allow you to do that.
Mhm.
That sense of that conversation can span a week, a month,
Yeah.
or it can happen in a few seconds. But you decide, and other things happen in between. You have your dinner, you go to work, you go on holiday, you go elsewhere, you change countries, but that conversation can still kind of relays round. And I think that interesting thing for me, sometimes asynchronous communication is quite an interesting thing.
I had a friend at school who, back in the 70s, when the USSR was encouraging people to communicate from the West with people in the USSR, and he played chess with someone in the USSR by post.
Oh, right, the post, okay.
Which is kind of the same thing, you know, you make a move, write it in a letter, go to the post office, post it. It would eventually get to whoever in the USSR, and they would do their move and
then they write
do the
back.
same back. And so it could be, I mean, I have to imagine it's got to be a minimum of 2-3 weeks for a set of moves to take place. And as you say, life carries on in between, doesn't it? It's like, you know.
I mean, I was at Lancaster University, and one of their projects was they were investigating, somebody was doing research into British Post from the sort of Victorian era, because the postcard at the time, there were multiple sort of delivery date times. So it wasn't like just twice a day that it got collected, it was much more frequent. So postcards would be a quick way of sending information, and so it was sort of almost like same day delivery.
So sort of like a telegram on the Jeep.
Yeah, but postcards could be, you know, they're not like they are today. You send it and 2 weeks later somebody receives it. It was almost next day, or that, you know, because there were so many, the frequency of collection and delivery was much greater than it is today.
Wow.
But nobody realises that. And again, those things are not really, maybe on the internet somewhere, but it's only when somebody started doing a research project and it's like, wow, this is kind of interesting that these postcards were sent and delivered the same day almost. So you could send a postcard, and the frequency of postcards, whereas we don't do that anymore. But it is that sort of, I think that's quite an interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
But we do it with text, I suppose. We send text, and you think, oh, I'll send a text because then I don't know whether they're busy or not, and I'll hear from them at some point.
Yeah, and you don't, I mean, if it's something you do regularly and you're comfortable with it, you don't send the text and then sort of sit waiting for, you let it be and come back to it.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like email, but then there's probably a certain amount of etiquette about how long you leave it before you, or how.
Well, it depends who you're doing it with,
yes.
isn't it? You know that certain people are going to be upset or not upset by how long you take. Well, we've gone a long way from our initial starting point, but I get how it all ties back to time-based stuff, and that's been really interesting and provocative.
Ended up at postcards,
Mm.
which is again time-based. The other artist that I think of time-based as well was it was a music piece. It was I can't remember the name of the artist, but you'll find it if it's to do with sending, broadcasting a piece of music to the moon and bouncing off the moon, and recording it coming back. And the piece was a grand piano in the middle of the gallery at Margate, the Turner at Margate, and it was a grand piano. It was set up to play, but it was playing the piece that had been sent to the moon and bounced off and come back. And so there was pieces missing. There was kind of notes missing. So it would just play, and then there was pause, and then it would carry on. But it was like these bits. So where did the other bits go? You know, they probably still shooting through the universe. Yeah. That I found interesting. That's one of those memorable things about time as well. Not necessarily photography related or media related, but it is media related in some way. But this art piece of sort of Beethoven's whatever in sort of broadcasting. Yeah, that was kind of my sort of thought-provoking as well, about this sort of idea of broadcasting something, but it's some of it bounces and some of it doesn't come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and it was very, again, a simple idea, and it's like, well, yeah, that was sort of a piece. I wish I knew the name of the artist, but if you find Moon musician Margate sort of Turner exhibition, it's been a couple of years now. Yeah, it's one of those things where if I find it, I'll send it to you. But it's one of those interesting. Again, sort of, how do we perceive that time, and where's that piece of music gone? It's been recorded. It's sort of recorded in some way, but it's not all there anymore.
Well, that's been really interesting and given me lots to think about, and another way to look at stuff.
Time-based. So you're continuing with the time-based sort of work? Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think the whole... I'll dig out some books as well, because I've got a book somewhere of